Hello friends, welcome back to my channel. Hazel here, and today I have a 2-month wrap-up. I'm going to be talking about the books I read in June and July. As you may already know, if you've been watching my channel for a while, I was out of the country at the end of June, and so I decided to let the 2 books I read in June just roll over and talk about them in a wrap-up at the end of July. If you're just watching this video because you want my Medieval-A-Thon wrap-up and you don't care about the 2 books I read in June, I will put a time on the screen for you to jump ahead to, and you can just watch that. So, starting with June, the first book I finished in June was The Priory of the Orange Tree by Samantha Shannon. This is a huge book. It's like 800-something pages. And so I wanted to finish it before I went on my trip because I didn't want to start it and then not read it for 3 weeks and come back to it. So for a lot of the beginning of June, I just dedicated my time to reading this and getting through it without burning myself out. So this was most of my June. I have a dedicated book review that I posted a couple weeks ago, and I will link to that down below if you want to watch that. I have a lot of thoughts about it. I really love it. I gave it 5 stars. It's a really good epic fantasy, adult fantasy. It's difficult to give a brief synopsis, so if you're interested in hearing about this book and my thoughts on it, go watch that other review. But for the purpose of this video, 5 stars, loved it, awesome. The only other book I actually finished in June was just a tiny book I picked up after finishing Priory and before I left on my trip, because I wanted to just read something really quick, and so I picked up Tales and Songs of Ireland. This is just a tiny, like, 50-page book that's just got tales from Ireland. It's got some illustrations. There's about 4 or 5 stories in here. One of them is, of course, about St. Patrick. The rest are just different stories from Irish folklore. I gave this 5 stars. It's probably not going to be anyone's favorite book, but if you just want short Irish stories, it's really good, and it has some discussion of like with St. Patrick saying like he drove the snakes out of Ireland, but they didn't really have snakes, and so it's understood to be he drove the pagans out. And it has things like that throughout it, which really helps connect with the stories and understand them a little better. So I really enjoyed this little book. So those were my 2 books in June. The rest of my books are in July, and they all are for Medieval-A-Thon. In case you didn't see my TBR video where I talked about this readathon, I will link that down below, but honestly, once I describe the readathon, you can stop because I changed most of those books. I am not good about sticking to TBRs, which is why I don't do them. So I meant to read 8 books. I actually counted as read 7 books, but one of them was a DNF. The DNF I am not going to count as a finished book toward my total number of books, but I do need to count it for the prompt I was trying to read it for, because it was the only one I had that would count for that, so I'm making an exception. So in Medieval-A-Thon, if you read 6 books, you are a king or queen, and I finished 6 books, so I am a queen. So I am going to talk about those 6 books plus my DNF in the order of the prompts. So I will talk about those books going down the list of clothing and then my weapon, rather than in the order I finished the books. So the first prompt to get the crown is to read a book that has a fight for the crown, and for this I read Three Dark Crowns by Kendare Blake. If you somehow haven't heard of this, it is a young adult fantasy in which on this island, every generation, there are 3 queens born, and they all have equal right to inherit the throne, but when they turn 16, they have to fight to the death to see which one survives and gets to actually be queen. And each queen has a special gift. The 3 discussed in this book are the elemental gift, so control over fire, water, air, stuff like that. The naturalist gift, which means the ability to help plants grow and have an animal familiar that is more than a pet, it's closely bonded with you. And the poisoner gift that allows a queen to eat any amount of poison, drink it, consume it, and be perfectly fine. So in this book, we follow these 3 queens as they are approaching the time when the fight to the death is going to begin. This book, I think, suffered from a bad synopsis because going into it, I had heard some kind of mixed things, some people saying it wasn't what they expected, wasn't what they wanted, and so they didn't enjoy it as much. I think the problem is that the synopsis sells it as this book is about the fight to the death, but that isn't true at all. They're not allowed to start killing each other until like 75% of the way through the book, and even then the fight doesn't really start. I imagine that's going to start in the next book in the series, but I haven't started that one yet, so I'm not sure. And so I think a lot of the disappointment surrounding this book was because of that, but going into it knowing that it was just getting to know these characters and the world and everything, I wasn't disappointed, and I really, really enjoyed this book a lot more than I thought I would. Going in, I thought it would be more of like a 3 or 4 star, but I gave this 5 stars. I found myself really attached to the characters and really interested in the world. There's still so much more about it that I want to know, and there was also a twist at the end that I kind of predicted, but still took me by surprise, and I just really enjoy this, and I am so eager to get the next book and continue on and figure out what happens to these characters. I thoroughly enjoyed this book. The next prompt to get the helmet is a book with a dragon on the cover, and for this I read The Never-Ending Story by Michael Ende. As you can probably guess, this is the book upon which the movie that a lot of people have nostalgia for was based on. It is a fantasy in which, in the real world, a boy named Bastian finds a book called The Never-Ending Story, and he reads it, and in this book, it is about a world called Fantastica, not Fantasia. They changed that in the movie. Fantastica, and there is something called the Nothing that is destroying Fantastica. It's described as, when you look at it, it's like being blind, because it's not that there's emptiness, it's that there is nothing to see. There is nothing at all. And all of Fantastica is being consumed by the Nothing. And so within the Never-Ending Story, a boy named Atreyu has to go on a journey to find out how to save Fantastica. So something I knew going into this is that the movie that everyone is familiar with is only the first half of this book. The movie ends when Fantastica is saved and it's no longer being destroyed by the Nothing, but the book continues on way past that, and Bastian actually goes into Fantastica and has his own adventures there. I did the annoying bookworm thing of finishing the book before I watched the movie, And I don't regret that, but it did make it impossible to enjoy the movie because Michael Ende himself, I believe, is dead now, but he was alive when the movie came out. And he actually hated the movie because it doesn't properly portray a lot of things about the book. And by cutting off the entire second half, it removes a lot about the interplay of fantasy and reality and the importance of reality. And so I kind of hated the movie, but I love this book so much. It is one of my new favorite books ever. It is just such a fun, interesting fantasy world that has so many different parts to it that are all interesting on their own. And there are a lot of really interesting, really well thought out things about fantasy and reality and how they relate to each other. And I just really enjoyed this book. I'm planning on doing a full review on this at some point, but until then, I love this book. The next prompt to get the breastplate is to read a book with a shiny cover, and for this I read Poems of the Irish People. I actually decided to read this one last minute because it was the last day of July and I hadn't even started a shiny book, but this is only like 100 pages long, and it's all poems, so I knew I could read it quickly. I ended up giving this 3 stars. It's a compilation of poems from a lot of different authors, and they're about Ireland itself, or the people of Ireland, or the folklore, and they're put into those 3 categories. And some of them I really enjoyed, despite the fact that I normally am just kind of meh on poetry in general. Some of them just had really great lines that I loved, but a lot of them were just okay, I guess. It's nothing exceptional. Being familiar with the history and culture of Ireland definitely helped me appreciate this more, but a lot of them just didn't do anything for me. Surprisingly, none of the ones from the fairy tales section were that good, in my opinion. The ones I enjoyed were all from the country and people of Ireland sections. I don't know what it was. They were just really hit or miss, and so while I really enjoyed some I would be fine never reading again. So it was half good, half meh, so I gave it 3 stars. The next prompt to get the leggings was to read a thick paperback, and for this one I tried to read Dune by Frank Herbert. This is, of course, a very thick paperback. It's 800 pages plus another 100 pages of glossary and history and stuff. I got a little over 300 pages in before I just knew I couldn't do it anymore, or at least I couldn't push myself through it in July. This is a for now DNF. I was really interested in the premise, and I enjoyed a lot of what I read, but it's just so big. It's such a big book to dedicate time to, and I didn't have all that much time since I had so many other books to read, and I'm not going to have much time for the next year since I'm going to be working on a thesis for grad school. Like I said, I was really enjoying the premise, and a lot of the world building was really interesting too, but I was about to get to the section where I know from hearing other people talk about it, it's a lot of time in the desert, and that kind of story is just really, really slow for me. And on top of that, the writing style was kind of difficult for me to get a handle of. The point of view switches between characters a lot, like not just between chapters, it'll switch like from one character to another between paragraphs, and then 3 paragraphs later it's back to the first point of view. And so at times it's just kind of difficult to follow whose head you're in, and you're bouncing around and it feels a bit like pinball. And on top of that, you get characters' thoughts in italics a lot. And also, there's a lot of times where characters are talking about something as if you're supposed to understand what it is, and it's not until like 5 to 10 pages later it's actually explained what they were talking about that whole time. So for those pages, you're just sitting there going, what is happening? What are you referencing? And so all of those things just like kept me from completely settling into the writing style and being totally comfortable with it. I was always kind of trying to figure out what was happening, and I just knew if I pushed myself through the next 500 pages, I would resent it. So I'm going to set this down for now. I will probably pick it up maybe next summer, but I just couldn't do it. So I am counting this as my thick paperback to get the leggings, but because I didn't finish it, I'm not going to count it toward my total number, but I still read 6 books, so I'm fine with that. The next prompt to get the boots is to read a book that has pages that have yellowed over time, and for this one I read Raptor Red by Robert T. Bakker. So I didn't know this going into this book, but Robert T. Bakker was actually a paleontologist and knew a whole lot about dinosaurs. He was actually one of the dinosaur consultants, I guess, on the movie Jurassic Park. And this book, I quickly realized, was him trying to simultaneously educate people about dinosaurs and what they may have actually been like, what their life would have been like, their environment, and give a better picture of what kinds of dinosaurs lived together at the same time and how they migrated to different places, while also telling an entertaining narrative. So this book follows a Utah raptor, which is a raptor that was actually about the size of the velociraptors in the movie Jurassic Park. Real velociraptors were a lot smaller. I think I heard the description they were about the size of turkeys are nowadays. So it follows a Utah raptor referred to as Raptor Red through a year of her life as she tries to survive, as she travels along with her sister and her sister's children and tries to find a mate and everything. And so it is telling the story of Raptor Red while also trying to give some education about dinosaurs and how they worked, and also like evolution and biology and stuff like that. So, like I said, it's clear that Bakker was trying to be educational and entertaining at the same time, and for the most part, he did succeed. There were times I felt that the explanation of different things took over a little too much and distracted from the story. For example, one time Raptor Red and her sister were about to get in a fight, or were in a fight, and it broke off to explain how oxygen through the lungs and bloodstream and everything worked in this one particular dinosaur. And it went on for just a bit too long and became distracting, and it was like obviously a here's how this worked, rather than just casually thrown in so that you understand it better. And there were a couple times that happened, so I gave this 4 stars because I did really enjoy it, but at times that educational push distracted a bit too much. When I posted a picture of this on my Instagram, I had a couple people comment and say that this is their favorite book, and all I'm gonna say is those people must really love dinosaurs. So if you are interested in learning a bit more about dinosaurs and what their world would have been like, while also having a fictional narrative to follow, this is a really great book for that. If you can get past the occasional over-explanation of science, it's really, really enjoyable. The next prompt to get the cloak is to read a book that has red on the cover. And for this, I read The Grace Year by, I believe, Kim Liggett. I got this book as an electronic ARC through NetGalley, and I mostly got it because at the time I did, you could just request it and immediately have it instead of having to wait for it to be approved. And it sounded interesting. It's sort of a combination of The Handmaid's Tale and Lord of the Flies. So in this society, it is believed that when girls turn 16, they have magic, and that if they don't work out all that magic and release it into the wild, that they will cause trouble in what's called the county where they all live. And so every year, all of the girls in the county who recently turned 16 are sent out to this camp where they are supposed to live together for the year and work out their magic so that they can come home and just be docile housewives. This sounded really interesting, and it sounded like it could be really good, but it's never a good sign when you start a book and immediately think, oh, okay, this is a 3-star at best. I think the only reason I was able to finish this book is that it was pretty fast. I read it on my phone while I was in England, and I would just read it for little bits at a time, and I think that helped because I never had just like an hour straight of reading it. I think if I had tried to read it that way, I would have gotten so frustrated with it at some point that I would have given up. There were a lot of problems I had with it that are both about just the premise and world building in general, but also the plot at times. To begin with, this is, like The Handmaid's Tale, clearly like a misogynistic dystopia where for some reason it is just excessively sexist and women are treated as always lesser than men. And where The Handmaid's Tale did that pretty well, this book didn't. It was so misogynistic. It was cartoonish. Like, women could not do anything at all in this book. At one point, it even says that women weren't allowed to hum because it was thought that if you're humming, you might be casting a spell. And if you're casting spells, you still have your magic. And still having your magic is something you can and will be killed for. So it's literally, women can't hum without being killed. Women can't do anything. It was so excessive. Also, whereas in The Handmaid's Tale, it's very clear this used to be normal society, and then these things happened, one thing led to another, and now we have this dystopia. And then eventually, somehow, it goes back to being normal. In The Grace Year, they just live in the county, which is in the middle of the forest that supposedly no one has gone out into and survived. and we don't know why they're there. They have something that is like 99% the same as Christianity, except instead of eating the apple that Satan told her to eat, Eve didn't get rid of all her magic. Like, that's the only difference between the religion in this book and extreme misogynistic forms of Christianity. And so the world building just wasn't done well at all. And then on top of that, you have the main character, whose name I already forgot because I don't care. She has 3 separate guys who fall in love with her, and one of them comes out of nowhere and is supposed to be some plot twist that's supposed to make you hate him, except it doesn't make sense. I read this as an arc, and so it may be that some things were added or removed or changed between that version and the final version. I'm not sure if the final version is out yet, but honestly, there is so much wrong with this book that I think it could be better if they removed or added some stuff, but I don't think it could ever be a good book without fundamentally changing it, which you don't have time to do between arc and final. There is just so much young girls fighting with and against and hating each other, and the main character is such a not like the other girls girl. Like, her father raised her to be more like a boy, so she does boy things. And like I said, all the guys are for some reason in love with her. It was unbearable to read. By the end, I don't know if I was finishing it so that I could give a rating that was justified, or if I was finishing it out of hatred. When I started the book, I thought it would probably be a 3-star, and by the end, it was a 1-star. If you are considering reading this book, I highly suggest just reading The Handmaid's Tale and Lord of the Flies back to back and calling that even. I really don't think this is worth your time unless you want to see how misogynistic dystopias can be done badly. So to end on a much more positive note, the last prompt I completed was to get the sword, and it was to read a book that has something pointy on the cover. And for this, I listened to the audiobook of my favorite book, The Last Unicorn by Peter S. Beagle. Obviously, since it's my favorite book, I gave it 5 stars. I love it so much. Honestly, I don't think I ever could do a review of it because I just don't even know where I would start. It would probably just be an hour of me listing things I love about the book. The plot follows a unicorn who learns that she is the last unicorn left in the world, and she is determined to see if that is true and why, and if the rest of the unicorns aren't completely gone, find them and save them. And so she leaves her forest and sets out on this journey and encounters different people and obstacles and things along the way. Peter S. Beagle is my favorite author. I just love his writing style. Even his prose is so lyrical and poetic, and he uses a lot of relatively abstract metaphors to describe things, but he does them very well. They always, in some way, capture what he's trying to describe, even if it's just the feel of the way it's written describes the feel of this thing, if that makes sense. If you don't like overly metaphorical descriptions, you need things that are a lot more concrete, honestly probably avoid Peter S. Beagle in general, because that is a lot of his writing style. But if you do enjoy a more poetic writing style, I think it's beautiful. It is so lyrical, and I have loved this book since the first time I read it. This is my first time listening to the audiobook, and in fact the first audiobook I've ever listened to all the way through. I'm not good with audiobooks, but I've read it twice before, and before I listened to it this time, I had read some really good books recently, and I was thinking, has this been bumped out of the #1 spot? Is The Last Unicorn still my favorite book? And listening to this just reminded me that it is. It's so beautiful. I'm just gonna end up repeating that over and over if I talk about it any longer. So if that sounds interesting to you, please read this book. I love it so much. 5 stars forever and always. So that is all the books I read for Medieval-A-Thon. I had planned to read a book to get the bow and arrow as well, and I had even started one, but I just didn't have enough time to finish it. So I got all the clothing and the sword, so I at least have one weapon, and I am not counting the DNF. I got 6 books read, so I am a queen who is fully clothed with a sword. If you participated in Medieval-A-Thon, feel free to comment down below and let me know what you read and how your reading went. If you have read or are interested in reading any of the books I talked about, including the 2 books I read in June, feel free to talk to me about that as well. If you liked this video, please give it a like and subscribe to see more. I will leave my social media links down in the description so you can follow me on Goodreads, Instagram, and Twitter. I hope you have a wonderful rest of your week, and I will see you in the next video. Bye.